Okay, everyone, settle down. We've got stuff to discuss today on the morning briefing for Monday, the 17th of March, John. How are you?
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you, Hamish. I'm doing okay. It's the morning after, the night before, or the day before. It's never nice on these occasions. It always feels like a bit of a group therapy session, but there's plenty to get into, isn't there? So we'll have a wee chat about the game and recent events in terms of Celtic's performances against Rangers in the derby.
Yeah, plenty to discuss, and would love as many of your comments as possible. You do need to be subscribed these days to comment, but if you're subscribed, you'll be able to. It would be great to hear what you made of the game yesterday. I have a sense of what you might be saying, but any interesting points you want to make, I'll try and get as many of them on screen as possible. Just before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor. They don't let you down, John. This Celtic Way video is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, head over to s1jobs.com, upload your CV today. They've got thousands of jobs across Glasgow, Edinburgh, and the surrounding areas. So you'll find the one you want at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Yeah, funny one. I guess starting with kind of exactly how you feel. Because I was kind of, I don't know, went into the game with a bit of I think in the lead up to the game, I was pretty confident. And then we heard the news about McGregor and Trusty missing the game. And I did have a kind of uneasy feeling, I think, in the lead up to the game. And from the get-go, that feeling just kind of increased to the point where at half-time, it was like, I don't see any way of us getting back into this. The team, to their credit, got back into it, but then just summing up the day, the sucker punch at the end. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to lose as a league or anything like that, but it does still feel like a pretty kind of big loss. I think to lose twice in a row to them is never good.
Yeah, I was shocked by that first half performance, I have to say. Ibrox was what it was. Brendan Rodgers talked a big game in the media last week. Like, he was quite chirpy, talking up how we're definitely not going to see that from Celtic again. We're going to be ready for this one. We're going to right the wrongs from Ibrox, that kind of vibe from Brendan Rodgers. I understand that's part of his job as a manager, but generally when Brendan Rodgers has that kind of attitude or so bold or so forward in his media comments, you got the feeling that Celtic are about to back it up because they've done that so often during Brendan Rodgers' time at Celtic, both in his first spell and his second spell. And I was very surprised by what I saw in that first half yesterday. I thought it was pretty appalling. It was probably the worst half of our entire season, probably the worst half of maybe Rodgers since he returned to, maybe the worst half I've ever seen under Brendan Rodgers. I don't know. Maybe that's going too far, but I was just so surprised with how bad Celtic were yesterday. Just completely disorganised, both in possession, out of possession, and Rangers were just waiting there to pounce on everything that Celtic did wrong. It was concerning and it was worrying, and thankfully the second half was obviously an improvement. But again, the way we gave that game up at the end, Brendan Rodgers always says, if you don't win the game, don't lose it, and we just absolutely threw it away again. So, and you know me, Hamish, I'm often quite balanced in these situations, but I thought that first half was appalling yesterday, and I think some of the players need to understand that this, while the Premiership title is on its way to Celtic, these matches mean so much to supporters, and they can't perform like that against Rangers. And people are talking about we've conceded 3 goals against Rangers in the last 3 matches against them. It's actually 4 in the last 5 we've conceded 3 against them, going back to the end of last season. So it's not good enough, and Brendan Rodgers needs to fix it, because whatever he's doing in these matches against Rangers now, I just don't think is working anymore. I don't know whether they've figured something out. I don't know if the way Rodgers is preparing for these games or tactically setting up in these games suits this derby, but something needs to change, because I think supporters, if they keep seeing performances like that against Rangers, they're not going to be very happy, title or no title.
That's what I was going to say, because you're saying you were surprised with the first half, and I agree that the big thing for me was, at Celtic Park, where the team have been so good this season. We've had the strongest season at Celtic Park as I think we've ever had. I mean, we've, just been so good, scoring so many goals, so comfortable in all of these matches, and that for me was a shocker yesterday. But then also you do look at the recent derbies, and I thought it was very similar to the two recent derbies. Now, we won the cup final, and I always think that should be pointed out. The team won that match, albeit on penalties, but that was a disjointed performance. That first half was a bad performance at Hampden. Ibrox was just a terrible 90 minutes. And yesterday, certainly in the first half, was as bad as that. So you're talking 4 out of the last 6 halves, bare minimum, have been really bad Celtic performances, and really kind of not dealing with the Rangers' game plan. And the Rangers' game plan is very obvious. Wait for us to give the ball away and really kind of promising positions for them. Conceded 9 goals, as you say, in the last 3 games. How many of those goals have been quality Rangers goals? Okay, some of the finishes maybe, but I guarantee if you looked at 7 or 8 of those 9 goals, they would be from Celtic doing something badly wrong. And that's the frustration. Cameron Carter-Vickers spoke about that as well. And like it's not really a small sample size anymore. As I say, it's 3 derbies in a row now that the same patterns have been repeating. Celtic just looking sloppy. Like, see, like every pass we played yesterday was an effort. Did you not feel like that? You know, normally you watch Celtic, especially at Celtic Park, and it's like, right, we're cooking here, we're moving the ball, players are moving it, zipping it. Every pass yesterday felt like we could give it away, and that's just a team that's really uncertain. But I don't know why.
So people will point to the Ibrox game and say, well, Callum McGregor played in that one, so we can't have missed him too much yesterday. But for me, I just think Callum McGregor is that kind of connecting tissue between all these players, especially in that lower, our lower third. And I think it was interesting what Brendan Rodgers said. He immediately pointed to the Callum McGregor thing unprompted. And I don't think that's an excuse. He talks about Callum McGregor bringing tactical balance to the team. I think my argument in response to that, or what my response to that would be, is if we're so reliant on one player who has his fair share of fitness and injury problems at times, if we're so reliant on one player, then that is a problem Celtic need to solve. We can't be so reliant on Callum McGregor that if he's out the team, we just completely fall apart. Now, Arne Engels just wasn't that connecting force between the defence and the goalkeeper. You so often see Callum McGregor just drop in, taking possession and playing through the lines, and we just didn't have that against Rangers yesterday, and it was a big issue. It was a big issue. We just couldn't get through Rangers' press. But again, my argument is if we're so reliant on Callum McGregor, then there's a real problem there, I think.
But like we are, and I agree with you in saying that. I think if McGregor had played yesterday, would have certainly calmed us down when we went 1-0 behind. That was just what I felt in the performance. Like there was nobody out there calming things down. As I say, every single pass was an adventure. I think that's one of Tony's kind of phrases he uses. Every pass was an adventure. You felt that anything could happen. I never felt watching that game like Celtic had kind of any sort of proper control. Even in the second half, when there was clearly an improvement, I still don't think there was a moment in that game where you'd actually look at it and go, Celtic are playing well here. It was kind of like just really disjointed, and it's obvious to me that this is that, quite frankly, Rangers have worked us out, and it kind of pains me to say that.
Yeah, and it's bad when Kasper Schmeichel looks so.
That's what I mean.
Panicky and possessed.
Carter Vickers, he's another one. Carter Vickers was shaky.
And Schmeichel's usually so reliable, but the fact that he was so shaky showed me he didn't really have confidence in what was ahead of him. And it was ragtag in possession coming out of the back there. And that it's fine to play at the back, but when you're disorganised and you don't really know where your teammates are or where they're supposed to be, then it becomes a real problem. And Rangers, as we've said, are just lying there waiting to trap us and nick the ball, and they've got Rasko buzzing about, and it just wasn't good, Hamish. It just didn't feel good. It wasn't good in the sense of it was effective against us. And where does it go from here? Because I think Rodgers and the players have a little bit of soul searching to do in terms of this derby. Obviously, I think they're going to go on and win the Premiership title, but there's still a derby left in the season, and they need to show something different. They just need to show something different.
But as Brendan Rodgers, well, I was going to ask, is he capable of changing the game plan. I guess he is now, because we saw that in Europe, didn't we? There was a clear change in Europe after the Dortmund game. People were speaking about his game plan. I know we're talking about different things here, but he showed that he can adapt for different circumstances, and we saw an improvement away from home in Europe. And I think Celtic, for as good as we can be when we're on song and we're moving the ball well, we are a joy to watch, and people shouldn't forget that. But we do have an issue, not just against Rangers, but like, remember Club Brugge at Celtic Park? Remember the first half? That was a very similar plan to Rangers, and they really nullified us, and we were, Cameron Carter-Vickers passed the ball into his own net. That game, like that, just sums up the way the players struggle to deal when a team plays like that. So I guess, as you say, moving on to what are the solutions here? What can we do? Is it a case of, is there like a player out there, or a kind of idea of a player that could help us through? You hear people talking about a kind of strong enforcer in midfield who might give us a bit more power. Open to ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that is a difficult one. I don't think Rodgers is necessarily going to change the formation that he plays or the style of players that he plays. I do think in Europe, Celtic have obviously been a bit more patient in terms of waiting to see what the opposition does before like trying to pick through the lines, whereas Rangers just ran at them, and Celtic were just the brick wall to be pushed over yesterday. And that kind of approach or that mentality, I think, was part of it. I think Rodgers said something like clarity of thought. There was no clarity of thought. I'm not sure what that nebulous term really means, but I think in Brendan Rodgers' idea, it's like enact the game plan and don't cave under the pressure. Rangers are going to bring pressure. They're a good team in this context of playing counter-attacking style or that kind of counter-pressing style. Celtic just walked right into the traps that they'd set for us.
Yeah.
And I've got a worry, Hamish, that some of these players' motivations dropped after the Champions League. We've spoken a bit about this maybe a couple of times on this channel. I'm worried that some of the motivation levels have dropped in these players since we've gone out of Europe, and I don't know if they're just not as up for domestic football. Cameron Carter-Vickers, insists there's no kind of mindset switch or whatever people would say. But the evidence on the pitch, I think, speaks for itself. And some of these players just don't look like they're up for this week-to-week stuff. I mean, how many blow-away performances have we really had since, I just feel like all the excitement, all the positivity, all the moving forward was in the early part of Celtic season when there was all this buzz around Europe. And I just feel that's dissipated somewhat. And I can't help but see the players just dip from what we know that they're capable of. And there's only really one explanation for that for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess there has been a dip from the early part of the season. It's difficult because generally we still have been winning games, and I think last week against Hibs, for example, I thought after the game we said that was a pretty good performance against a decent team. So I think the team have still performed at times, but yeah, I mean they certainly have an issue in this.
It kind of feels like they've just been doing enough to an extent, though. And yesterday, just doing enough was never going to be enough, because Rangers were always going to, led by Barry Ferguson, for all his faults, will have had them up for that game. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I just don't think we could, going into these games and just doing enough and just ticking over until the end of the season and having a wee party in May, I don't think is really good enough when we're considering, Celtic moving in a forward direction, a positive direction. It needs to be more than that to keep the fans engaged in the team, to keep the fans engaged in the performances. That's the reality of Celtic. You can't just do all your work in the early part of the season and then coast right through to the summer. I don't think that's really enough for supporters who, are paying their money and so invested in the team on a week-to-week basis.
I think at the start of the season, what was driving the performances, Champions League perhaps. I think competition as well in the squad. That's the driver. That's the main driver. If you know there's a player behind you who can take your place. And at the moment, I look at the squad and the team's we're kind of certain of the team before every game. And I know there's a positive in that, and that you've got your strongest team and it's settled, etc. And I know we're missing, like Bernardo's missing, and obviously McGregor, Trusty, Scales, and Bernardo and Scales would have come in yesterday. But I was kind of looking at the bench yesterday, and I'm thinking, is there really much coming off the bench? And also, if you're like Nicholas Kuhn, who was poor yesterday, very poor, and hasn't been great over the recent period, but his place is kind of still going to be there when the big game comes around. Or if you're,
there's no real
one of the
jeopardy
midfielders, someone like Arnie Engels or Rail Hatate, you're starting virtually every game at the moment. Or even like Alistair Johnson, who I don't know this, I've not heard this, but I am convinced is carrying an injury, because that wasn't him yesterday. Like, even at times when he was getting the ball yesterday, usually drives forward and he looked weary to me. So I'm telling you, there's some sort of issue, because that wasn't Alistair Johnson. But the point I'm making, is there enough competition in the squad at the moment? I really think in the summer we really need to beef up that squad. And I'm not talking about signing squad players. I'm talking about signing quality to really rival these players. I'm going to go through a few comments, John. They're coming in thick and fast.
It's busy today. And thanks to everyone for commenting, because, it would be worse if me and Hamish were just chatting to each other into the void here, but we can see everyone's comments and everyone is hurting this morning. That's the nature of this rivalry.
Douglas is hurting and he's blaming me. Hamish, so much for your prediction of running amok. Just keep quiet until the final whistle. Okay, Douglas, I won't be speaking ahead of any game in the future. Gary, from the team sheet announcement, the playing nerves kicked in and were timid from the kickoff. I thought we were over that. Helen, too many pass backs, side to side instead of forward passes. Throw in back way instead of forward. You could go on and on. Big Rocky had a good game. I thought Naropski did have a good game, and I think he deserves credit for that. But the passing, it was just like the team just kind of lacked urgency, and it was just like they were kind of like they had no urgency to get forward, and passes were just safe. The amount of times, like Jeffrey Schlupp, who again, I thought, I know it's a bit of a divisive figure yesterday. I thought Schlupp was okay. I don't think he was one of the worst ones. The amount of times he got the ball, though, at halfway line and just turned around and passed it back to Schmeichel. And it's like, that's not what Celtic should be. That's not what we were at the start of the season. I know he wasn't there, but people talk about, Brendan Rodgers football can be boring, and perhaps at times it can. It wasn't at the start of the season. We weren't doing that at the start of the season. We're getting at teams. So maybe that feeds into your point. I don't know. But what I do know is that it was dreadful to watch some of that. I mean, the moment in the second half, dear oh dear, you've just got it back to 2-1. Celtic Park's loud, and it wasn't loud all afternoon, but it was getting there. And I think it was Carter Vickers, Johnson, Schmeichel, Naropski. The four of them were passing the ball between each other for about 5 minutes. And I'm screaming at the telly going, get it forward.
And it felt like there was multiple moments where it was our corner and then Kasper Schmeichel touches it within 3 touches, which is just not how our corners should be going at all. I mean, what does Brendan Rodgers say to the players today? Because I think it's clear that Rangers wanted it more at Ibrox. I think it's clear that Rangers wanted it more yesterday. So what does he say to these players to get a response out of them? Because I think the point you kind of mentioned earlier, there's just no jeopardy left in the season, whether it's competition for places or whether we feel like it's the direction of the title. Like, there's nothing.
I'd throw Yang in for a start in our next game. Get Yang, because he was great when he came on. Get Kuhn out the team for now. Get Yang in. Make a few changes in that team. I can't think off the top of my head who else I would change, but what's our next game? Is it Hearts at home? Put another midfielder in instead of Arnie Engels or Luke McCowan. I think you need to change something. You need to get a reaction somehow. My worry about if you're looking at the next derby at Ibrox, am I confident you're going to get a reaction in the game from the team? Not at all, because you should have got it yesterday.
Now. Yeah, I mean, and I was quite confident there was going to be some sort of reaction from the players yesterday. I was, and I don't mind saying that. Obviously, I got that wrong. But just from all the noises coming out of the Celtic camp, and again, what Rodgers was saying, it just felt like there was going to be a response. But there's no way we can have that confidence of a response at Ibrox based on what we've seen yesterday. It's now up to the players to prove themselves again in that context. Do you want to win these derbies? Do you feel the jeopardy? Do you feel this the same way? Or do you feel like you've done your hard work this season? You've gone through the Champions League. There's no European stuff left. There's the Scottish Cup, of course, the potential treble. The league's pretty much done though. But how much do you want to play for personal pride for Celtic? Because these games matter, and they might, internally they feel they don't matter as much as some supporters. But that is the reality, is that they matter. They matter to Brendan Rodgers. I think Brendan Rodgers was embarrassed yesterday. He sounded embarrassed in his post-match press conference because he hasn't suffered many of these derby defeats, and I think the way he talked last week, based on and then what we actually saw on the pitch, I think was pretty bad for Brendan Rodgers. It didn't look good for Brendan Rodgers, and he says there's no excuses, etc. But I mean, he gets paid to find the answers, so we're going to see if he's got the answers in the closing period of this season.
So you're going to be going to Ibrox, final derby of the season. The league's going to be won at that stage, I think, although I've not 100% looked into it. And you're potentially going to be looking at 3 defeats in a row against them if you lose that game. And by the way, that's all they have now domestically this season is that match. That's all they have. So they're going to be right up for that one. Meanwhile, we have a couple of trophies to win. So I can't say I've got huge confidence for that, but you don't want to lose 3 in a row because what does it do for confidence? It very quickly switches in this fixture. Remember kind of COVID time, before COVID times, Brendan Rodgers last time, we had a real dominance over them, and then COVID hit, and just before that, then they started to beat us every time they played us, basically, and then we got it back under Ange and under Brendan. And now, very quickly it appears it's maybe turned again, and they look like the team that's confident in these fixtures. And this Celtic team is so much stronger than Rangers. Like I'm not even having that up for a debate. When you look at the players we have and how we perform in the Champions League against Bayern Munich, Rangers wouldn't have come close to a team like Bayern Munich, and we did. We're a much better team than them. Our attitude is just off in this fixture, and that my issue here is as I just said, I don't feel like in the next derby with the league already won, I don't feel like we'll get a reaction in that game. I hope I'm wrong, but if you lose 3 in a row to them, as much as it's still, if we win the treble, will have been a great season, it is something you remember, losing 3 derbies in a row. So the pressure's on the team for the next game. But
you're only as good as your last derby. I'm not. I understand what you're saying is Celtic feel like a much better team than Rangers are, but that's all about, for me, being a good team on the pitch on the day. It's not just about ability, it's about your attitude in the game as well. And I think Rangers had a better attitude in that game yesterday, and that is a problem. And so on the day, they were a better team than us. I think, Brendan Rodgers saying maybe a draw would have been a fair result yesterday. I think that there's validity in that, in the sense that Celtic did have the best of the second half, Rangers had the best of the first half. But again, I'll just go back to Rangers wanted it more. And that's something Celtic need to take a long, hard look at themselves about, because that's not how this rivalry works. That's not how football in Glasgow works. That's just not how it works. To be a celebrated Celtic player, you need to show you want it in these big matches, these big derbies. And unfortunately, the jury's out on that in a moment. And again, we're going to see what happens at Ibrox.
Yeah, it's just strange because we've talked up this team all year, and I think I'd hope we all still rate this team. And they have some great players. Again, the European stuff was great. Domestic stuff in the main has been really good. But then they just seem to have a wee issue getting up, or a big issue getting up for these fixtures. And yeah, the attitude is everything. That's the one thing, maybe putting a positive slant on it, is how bad we were yesterday. I thought, and I do agree with the manager. I think if you're a neutral was watching that game, they would say a draw was a fair result. Rangers completely dominated the first half. We completely dominated the second half. So I think a draw was fair. But Celtic should be doing a lot better than getting even a draw at home to Rangers. So, yeah, I guess big picture, you always like the big picture stuff as well, and we are still heading for a treble. I do think that it's not a coping thing. It's just it's a fact. Like, we are still heading for a treble.
The reality is that Celtic are still heading for a treble, and the feeling today will dissipate, and everyone will feel a bit better about this as the weeks and months go on. But like I say, if Celtic are carrying momentum into next year and hitting these qualifiers in the summer, then things need to be moving forward positively. These are undoubted bumps on the road along the way, and I don't think Celtic can really afford to kind of have too many bumps without things becoming a bit disrupted, a bit question marks about some of the players, etc., etc. I mean, the reality is fans just don't accept performances like that against Rangers. And so we're heading for the treble, but I don't think it makes it any easier for a lot of people today because it was just so abject in that first half and they just looked so lost. I mean, if yesterday was competitive in the first half, but Rangers just ran over Celtic at Celtic Park with, 55,000 Celtic fans there. But I mean, the international breaks here. I mean, I'm just wondering what Rodgers is thinking about the summer and kind of transfers and all that, because I think that's an important part. And again, I think we had a very silly January. Would you not agree with that? I think we didn't do in January what we really needed to. And I think, again, that was a factor. Look at the bench yesterday.
Yeah.
No harm to some of the young players, but they're not really there because they're earning their minutes in the Celtic team. They're there because Celtic didn't really have any other options. 2 or 3 players down, and suddenly the bench is looking ropey, and the starting 11, you don't have the competition. So these are all things that Celtic need to consider as well. They need to have a strong transfer window. They need to have a strong end to the season now, because people will latch on to days like today, and it will fester. And if the team don't show something different, then determinations will be made about some of these players. As much as we rate them as a team, or as much as they did well in Europe this season, that is the reality of it. So we need to see a strong response from Celtic here from now until the end of the season. Otherwise, people are going to be a bit worried about the future direction of the team and stuff like that.
I know we've only got a few minutes left. I'm just thinking, because we've Celtic have been really strong this season, I would say, certainly results wise. You look at all the competitions, and we've kind of made or exceeded expectations, I would say, in all of them. But you can't shake this feeling, and we obviously see all the comments coming in since about November, December. There has been a lot of criticism for the playing style and the general level of performances, and I'm just wondering, how are we all going to come away from this season finishing? Because if we do win the treble and how our Champions League stuff went, it's clearly been a real success. But is there just maybe a sense that the team still, despite that, still need to kick on a good bit next season?
Yeah, I think you would say it's been a really successful season, but weaknesses still exist within the squad, especially when we're considering about playing better teams on a consistent basis. Next year we'll have qualifiers, so there'll be a one-off playoff knockout round. So that's 2 European matches. Then the kind of 8 games. So that's another 8 games. So that's 10 games at a really high level. Then you've got the games against Rangers, which could be another 4 or 5. You're thinking like 15 to 20 games a season are going to be against opponents that Celtic don't totally dominate the resources of. And Celtic need to be strong enough to withstand those challenges. Those are the games that ultimately Celtic fans will define Celtic by. It won't be against your Hibs and your Motherwell. No disrespect to them, but Celtic are expected to beat these teams. But Celtic need to show up and compete and consistently compete and do well against the players that they're not necessarily expected to dominate. And that is the problem. And so people will say, they've won the treble, they've done well, they had a good campaign in Europe. But how do you kick on from here now? How do you consistently make sure you're up for those 15 to 20 games a season that are absolutely going to define what people judge the team in terms of their quality? And there will be question marks if Celtic don't have a strong end to the season. That's undeniable. Going into these important qualifiers in the summer months are huge for Celtic. Recruitment has to be spot on, in and out of the club. And they need to be ready for those playoff matches, later in the summer, because they're just simply massive,
Yeah. I just wonder if we're victims of being so far clear at the top as well, and it really shouldn't be an excuse at all. It's not an excuse for the players, but I just wonder if deep down, they are just kind of aware of the league table and feel that. I wonder if they kind of feel like the season's kind of, I think you said earlier, the hard work's been done type thing. And the point I would make, we are talking about winning the Scottish Cup, but if you play like you did yesterday, maybe you get away with it against St Johnstone, because I don't think they're great, although they're improving a bit. But in a final against Hearts or Aberdeen, play like that we did yesterday in the first half, I don't even know if you're beating them at Hampden in the final. So there's still stuff to be done this season. We're not, packing our bags and heading on holiday yet. It's there's still work to be done. The players need, and I mean, they've got an international break. Is it at the right time? Is it at the wrong time?
Yeah.
I think for fans, it's at the wrong time. It might be a good time for the players to go away and just to come back, and because Celtic are very good at reacting to defeats, generally speaking. Not all the time, as we found out yesterday, but kick on now, beat Hearts, and get the league wrapped up and win the Scottish Cup, and we're all going to be feeling good about ourselves in the summer. Promise you.
Yeah, I think we will, ultimately. I mean, today's been a bit raw from ourselves. I mean, we've not solved anything today. We've talked through this for half an hour, and I still don't feel like we're any further forward. But, I mean, maybe the international break will be good for all of us as well, all of us supporters, just to reset a bit and recalibrate for this end of the season. It's not going to be a nice one to chew on, to stew on, whatever you want to say about it. It's not going to be a nice one. I think just the nature of that first half again, but we'll move forward and hopefully Celtic can figure something out and Brendan Rodgers can find that path forward, because there is stuff to be won this season. There's still stuff to achieve, and not great today though, Hamish.
Yeah. But, we've done enough winning in recent years to know that you have to accept the odd day like this, and hopefully the winning comes. And the winning's going to continue very soon, hopefully with a couple of trophies at the end of the season. Okay, final few comments before we go. Tom Doll, Johnson was awful, especially for the third. He slips because CCV misses a ball, but he's the one that has an opportunity to win the ball back from Egerman and doesn't. Ross, what needs to be done in the team again this summer? Tierney will fire it into them. He's going to be a huge signing. What you would do for him yesterday. We will still need a midfielder and a striker and for Kuhn to get to the dentist. Dennis wondering if we've run out of steam. Stephen, lack of height and strength in the side. And Andy talking about the qualifiers. They come quick. I hope the transfer work has been done. Plenty of analysis on the website, etc. John?
Yeah, we're digging into some of the stuff yesterday on the website later. We're having a wee look at Mike Narodsky's situation. There's stuff going up. We'll have plenty through the international break as well. So there'll be lots going on. We'll obviously be back tomorrow morning as well. Lots going on in the Celtic way, but it doesn't stop. Despite the pain of yesterday, we'll dig into all the issues, good and bad. That's just the way we go about it.
Okay, we'll head for now, everyone. But thanks once again for joining us today. And I don't know if you enjoyed the chat or whatever, but it was necessary anyway. And as John says, I'll certainly be back tomorrow to probably chat a little bit more about various things. I'll speak to you then.